All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are back again on the Global Compact for Migration webinar series, which is part of a certificate program as well as a socialization a program around the Global Compact for Migration, where every Tuesday since September, we have been unpacking each of the 23 objectives. So far, we've gotten to number 14, a good number because that means we are more with it. We're just slightly halfway to what has been a very interesting series of discussions, touching on many different issues. If you would like to catch up with the conversations and the panel discussions Global Compact for Migration, objective number 1 through to 13, you can find those on the Jrfdt website. So on behalf of the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, CCRM, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, Jrfdt, the International Institute for Migration and Development, IMAD, Metropolis Asia Pacific, MAP, and the Migrant Forum in Asia. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session, where we'll be looking at GCM objective number 14 that is centered around consular protection. And my name is Paddy Sianga-Knudsen, and I will be your facilitator today. I'm one of the vice presidents of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism. It's always a very interactive session. We have a very interactive, a very engaging group of participants, some that are students, some that are professionals, some that are joining us as friends of the various organizations to unpack these very important objectives that sit for this global framework. So today we are looking at consular protection, and the text from the GCM, calls on states to ensure consular protection, assistance, and cooperation throughout the migration cycle. And the commitment reads as follows: we commit to strengthen consular protection of an assistance to our nations abroad, as well as consular cooperation between states, in order to better safeguard the rights and interests of all migrants at all times, and to build upon the functions of consular missions to enhance interactions between migrants and states' authorities, countries of origin, transit, and destination in accordance with international law. And just setting a bit of context, this is in reference to the Global Compact, which was signed back in December 2018, a time that seems very far away from us because COVID has either slowed things down or has hastened or highlighted things that need to get going. And we know that there was an overwhelming majority of states, about 164, that signed up to the GCM. Yes, we still had within the UN, United Nations framework, 5 that voted against, quite a number, about a dozen or so that abstained in the vote. But we have seen the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration in various spaces. But regardless of who has signed up to this global framework or not, today we want to look at the functions of governments. And here we're talking about governments working with others, and particularly we're narrowing it down to consular protection. What is happening to migrants in terms of feeling that their rights and interests are being safeguarded? And here we're talking about all migrants, regardless of what their status may be in that host country, transit country. Or as they make their way. And we know that the GCM is calling upon consuls' role here and really emphasizing to say that it's time for the role of consuls to be highlighted. And I think a lot of scholars have written around how this role becomes kind of invisible in the space of migrants' rights protection, and also calling on what does this look like? We're just looking at from the part of the registration, but all the way to supporting what may be an undesirable outcome. And here we're talking about, for instance, support for undocumented migrants. What support goes for migrants who have arrived in another land and find themselves in custody. So what kind of support is also available for migrants? So these kind of undesirable outcomes that come as part of that migration journey. So today we would like to unpack I would say around 3 questions. We're trying to look really, where does the role of consular protection and assistance begin? And another person would say, where does it end? But also, what is the reality? We also want to find out, with COVID-19, did it really shine a light and a torch over, how we should shape the role of consular protection and the consular departments, the consular services of different embassies? Has it elevated, or has it kind of also put a spotlight in terms of the challenges, in terms of the limitations, but also in terms of the need of cooperation in order for consular protection and assistance to reach various migrants, particularly in times where there was social distancing, but also where they can also be distanced because of administrative or sort of legal provisions in some spaces. So here we're really looking at the need for cooperation. One of the GCM objectives 23, which we'll touch on at the very end, that looks at partnerships. So that's very important, but also highlighted in the SDGs in terms of cooperation in achieving sort of global objectives. We also want to have an opportunity to find out what can consuls do and what should they be doing in the spaces where we're seeing gaps as a chain, as this important chain of government in safeguarding migrants' rights. Do consuls, do migrants see consuls as frontliners, or is this really reserved for privileged migrants, those who would have access, let's say, to embassies and spaces, or those who would feel that they are already in a regular and a regularized position, so they would have that kind of access. So we want to unpack it with this critical space in mind, but also in a sense of trying to contribute to the discourse that is around this topic. And I'm privileged to give you the lineup of our speakers today. We're really honored that we can have His Excellency Noel Lynch, Ambassador of Barbados to the United States. Ambassador, please correct me if I don't pronounce your last name correctly. And also would like to welcome Ms. Ashu Basnet, who's a consular officer and the second secretary at the Embassy of Nepal in Malaysia. We also have Ms. Namrata Raju, who is the director for the India office at Equidem, and we'll hear more about the interesting work that they have been doing around in the Gulf region. And then we will hear very passionately so from Ms. Mervat Jumhawi. Mervat, please let me know if I pronounce your names correctly. And she is a union organizer based in Jordan. So we have a nice spread in terms of geography there for us to understand the different, the different aspects of this topic. And with that, we would like to just as I introduce Ambassador, who will kick us off in this discussion. Ambassador Noel is also ambassador not just to of Barbados to the United States, but he's a permanent representative of Barbados to the Organization of American States. He's a Barbadian statesman who began his political career as senator, and he was elected to the House of Assembly for 2 consecutive terms and appointed to cabinet on occasions to lead the development of Barbados tourism product, as well as policy as Minister of Tourism and International Transport. Has been exposed to the area of migration and mobility earlier on in his career. He has a marketing and communications background and also a professional athlete, and he has served as a lecturer at the University of West Indies and Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Cricket Association, and he carries many other hats in the field of sports, but also in other fields where he has taken up different positions. And so, Ambassador, as we ask you to speak with us, we know that you're fluent in English and Spanish, and we apologize that we don't have any Spanish speakers here, but you can feel free to greet. Well, we do have Spanish speakers, but we don't have a Spanish interpreter. So you can feel free to also greet the people who have joined us here from the Americas and Spanish speakers at large in that as well. And as we ask Ambassador to just speak to us around the importance and the key elements that are related to consular protection, to consular support in terms of migrants and diaspora communities under his jurisdiction, and what he sort of sees as the scope of the services that his embassy provides, and speak to us a bit around the cooperation within government agencies, but also with non-state actors in providing assistance and protection to citizens and diaspora of Barbados living in the United States. Ambassador Noel, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very, very much for having me this morning. I hope that you can hear me well.
Sorry, Ambassador, we cannot. Okay, yes, that's better. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, please. You can go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for this opportunity to join you this morning. It is Patty. You asked about my name. How do you pronounce your last name? Knudsen?
Knudsen, but you would need a potato. But I think Paddy is absolutely okay. Thank you, Ambassador.
No, but thank you very, very much for giving us this opportunity. As you know, Barbados is the world's newest republic, a country that has just become a republic, and we prided ourselves for a very, very long time in looking out for our diaspora, looking out for those who are born and raised in Barbados of Barbadian descent, even those who are descendants of Barbadians who found themselves in the exterior. A lot of what you cast the net very, very wide in terms of what the contribution that I'll make, but I will just say that many of the issues that you've raised are not issues that are usually grounded in what happens to us in Barbados or what happens to a lot of Caribbean people who are found in the exterior. But that said, we've got a lot of experience. Now, we have a female Prime Minister, Prime Minister Mia Motley, who's been making a name for herself on the global stage. And Prime Minister Motley's exhortation in many times is that many hands make light work. And therefore, we emphasize constantly the worth of the overseas diaspora to the development of our country, which is grounded primarily in the rich heritage that they bring coming out of Barbados, the rich heritage that comes from Barbados in terms of the services that we offer. Our literacy rate is extremely high. Our health services are the envy of many countries, even some developed countries. So there's a rich heritage about being a Barbadian. That is also grounded in the patriotism that you feel when you are a Barbadian citizen. Now, the Prime Minister's acknowledgement is that the diaspora constitutes a strategic resource in the socioeconomic development structures of our country. You cannot do it with the people alone that are founded in a very small developing country with an open economy. It's almost impossible. And the Prime Minister has emphasized from the time that she took office that we must tap into the rich collection of resources if we are to have optimum socioeconomic development of a very small nation. Now, all of the work, or most of the work that goes on in relation to our diaspora and those who have migrated out of Barbados into other countries is really grounded in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. But the Prime Minister's office has direct oversight for what happens in there, direct responsibility and oversight for the actions that we put in place. And this is grounded in a number of things that we're seeking to achieve. One is political inclusion of these persons who have migrated out of our country. I think many countries seem to forget that these folks must be included in your political structures if you are ever to create that basis and that environment for optimal development. And then also there's not only the economic side of it, but sociocultural development is an integral part of how we deal with looking at our diaspora, because I think people seem to ground a lot in remittances and the economic side of it, but there's a sociocultural reality to having your diaspora once they're living somewhere else, once your nationals are living somewhere else, the rich sociocultural blend that they can bring in terms of the development of your country. And then obviously, we pride ourselves in providing awareness of assistance. This is awareness of the assistance that we can bring to you, the migration and its effects, and also the negative effects of what we describe as irregular migration. Because there are a lot of people who actually come in, and I don't have to explain that to you, you understand the concepts of irregular migration. And therefore we pride ourselves on having an embassy and a mission and a unit within the mission that can tell you, that you can lean on, that all of our migrants can lean on whenever they come to these shores, whether they're legally doing so or illegally doing so, and we outline to you exactly what the parameters are. Now, all of this is really focused on developing and transforming Barbados, because Barbados is one of those countries, small developing country, 166 square miles, only 280,000 people. But at the same time, we are on the cusp of becoming the first small developed country in the world. And we believe that within a decade, we can achieve it. Now, when Prime Minister Motley came into office in 2018, she outlined this direction, her vision for the development of our country. COVID has slowed that progress, but we believe within the next decade, we believe that this country, our country, can be a fully developed country by 2032. Now, this involves identifying and harnessing the resources for all of the resources for the effective transformation of a small developing nation with limited resources at home. And we have set up within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and I'll come back to the embassy, a unit which we call the Foreign Unit, which is the facilitation unit, for returning nationals. This event, because we encourage nationals that once they have spent your time in the United States, you don't want to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. What you want to be is you want to be back in your country, retire in Barbados, come back and bring the knowledge that you've acquired, come back and own a piece of the rock, as we say, so that you can be a part and parcel of our development. And the Foreign Unit is equipped to look after all the needs of those seeking to return to Barbados and to encourage them to do so. And we place a high premium on our nationals abroad. It speaks to the recognition of the power and the potential of the diaspora in the ongoing national development equation. But it starts with actions to ensure that we build bridges between their country of residence and Barbados and the Barbadian populace. And the key action areas that we focus on are: one, market access. You're talking about goods and services, so you want to be able to have a transfer of goods and services cross-border, so that you understand that people who export out of Barbados, is your market where you're living receptive enough? How do we make it receptive enough for Barbadian goods and services? How do we also encourage you, if you are doing business over there, to bring your goods and services to Barbados, things that you know that Barbadians would want to access? Then we tap into their expertise. There's a huge, rich talent of expertise for our people who are overseas. Your knowledge, the issue of technology and technology transfer, and then, of course, access to financial resources that we don't readily have in Barbados. If you live in the United States, you live in Great Britain, you have access. You live in Africa, you have access to much the technology and maybe financial resources that we don't have. And then obviously the concept of building sustainable relationships between you and the Barbadian populace. And that has got to be the connection and the collaboration ongoing to be able to make it work. Now, one of the things that is important to us is celebrating our people in the exterior. And every opportunity we get to do so. Whenever there's a Barbadian doing well anywhere in the United States, in Europe, anywhere, we want to celebrate that person. And we want to make it known that that person is doing well on behalf of other Barbadians. And then, of course, the actual granular levels now, we have created huge databases on both sides of the Atlantic. So there's a database build-up. And we encourage people to want to participate in being a part of the Barbadian structures overseas. Because, you know, I must admit to you that there's some people who are born in Barbados or have children, or born in Barbados, they raise their children, and some of them just don't want to participate. It's an amazing feature that's their right. But we try to encourage you as much as possible to accept that you're Barbadian, accept that you have Barbadian roots, and accept that you want to participate. And then the whole concept is bringing value to the notion of participation. So we collect the information, we try to structure it in terms of location, of where exactly you are, and then there is also the deployment of how we deal with the resources. We have monthly engagements with our diaspora. We have a large diaspora meeting in the United States every month. First month, we have a big Zoom meeting. Now, that's one of the things that the pandemic has caused. And we have an events calendar that everyone knows about and can participate and look at. And then the flagship of our interaction and our events with these people is the Independence Week of Celebrations, that we celebrate an Independence Week of Celebration. There's ongoing legislation and legislative action in Barbados. One of the things that we're doing now, if you're born in the exterior of Barbadian parents, either male or female, it was once upon a time, it was only male, females didn't have it. If you're born of a Barbadian parent anywhere in the world, you can acquire Barbadian citizenship. We're now extending that down to third and possibly fourth generations. And we're working on that legislation to ensure that you have that. There's also the issue of the youth engagement. We have a youth engagement concept because you must engage the youth. If you don't engage Barbadian youth, then you're not doing, you're not giving it the full optimal opportunities that you have. And then we've established cross-border committees with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development. We are setting up now one with the Ministry of Agriculture. What we do is you have a committee in the ministry in Barbados, and you have a committee here. And then what happens is that they get together, they form their work plans, they form their strategic direction, and then they contribute every month to the development of there's a template, there is an actual checklist, and you can check off what you're doing, because we know that there are people in the exterior who have health knowledge, they have financial knowledge. There are people who you'd be shocked, even for such a small country, how many people that we have that are doing well and that we can tap into. And then just quickly, the effective communication. We've got an electronic newsletter that comes out every month to the diaspora, keeping them engaged. But then there's the outreach, and it's a multi-stakeholder approach and outreach. It involves ministries of government and government agencies. It involves the private sector in Barbados. It involves international organizations, Barbados associations, locally grounded, and then also to those that find themselves with any legal challenges. We look out. We also encourage you to come to the embassy to look out for them. And then there are obviously the consular services that you're very much familiar with, passports and travel documents and everything else, which is the run of the mill. And then the other services that we offer, university students and student services. We have a lot of students from Barbados who are studying in the exterior, and we look out for them because a lot of them sometimes fall into difficult circumstances, which even though the embassy does not have a particular budget, for example, to give you financial resources, we actually work with you to be able to solve many of your problems. During the period of COVID-19, we extended some repatriation services because there are people who came into the US and found themselves stranded here. They couldn't get back for all types of reasons, whether they were flights. We actually worked with airlines to put charters on to ensure that our nationals got back to Barbados, because you'd come here. Some people can't get a COVID test to go back. There are a number of other things. So the repatriation services are in vogue. There's the Diaspora National Service. We encourage you to want to give. We've just sent as many as opened the gates and sent as many as 20 nurses back to Barbados to work they're working, giving national service to Barbados, going into Barbados to help in our hospital. And then there's a lobby and an advocacy section that we give to our diaspora, ensuring that they do, that if in whatever legislative set you're found, that we also help you to be able to go in the right direction in inverted commas. And then of course, there is the volunteerism that we encourage for a lot of Barbadians living overseas. Finally, I'd just like to say, we have just started another layer of government in Barbados, which is going to be instituted now, which is the constituency committees, people's assemblies in Barbados. It's akin on to local government, which we don't have in Barbados, so that people can take responsibility for their actions. And one of the things that we're doing is we're seeking to extend these constituency committees to the diaspora. We want a diaspora constituency committee overseas, in both on either side of the Atlantic, in Europe and in the Americas. What we want to seek to do is that you participate actively, because these constituent assemblies are going to be elected through our Electoral and Boundaries Commission. We want our diaspora to participate effectively in this. And finally, the post-COVID actions. Well, the post-COVID reset calls for the diaspora to be integrally involved in everything that you do with the development of our country. We expect numerous resources that we hadn't intended to spend in terms of building a new health facility, doing some things that we never had intended to do. And what we need to do is to have a whole restructuring plan. And the diaspora, through the constituency committees, are going to be very much involved in that. I believe I've taken up more of your time than I'd expected. I hope that what I've said is in some way valuable to you, and I'm open for questions at any time. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for giving us not just the extent of the work, but also giving us a breadth of how the Barbadian culture also blends into the important work that you're doing at the embassy. And then, you know, for those of us who are oceans away, I think it gives us a better understanding. It's really sounds very impressive for, you know, a country, as you have said, with not a very huge population, but with a lot of huge ambitions. And probably it's a good time to also send congratulations, you know, in order of the different movements that are happening at, you know, at that high level with government, and also with the important work that you're doing in the embassy. I think we will come back to you with probably a question around, you know, that takes us away. You know, often we know that, you know, many migrants in a more that will be moving in a more regular way will probably find the doors easier to open at the embassy in terms of registration that allows you access to the many services that you've explained and outlined for us. And we have a question around you know, undocumented migrants and irregular migrants, as we would probably term, you know, what kind of support I think has gone there. But then also we were wondering, you know, the kind of collaboration that's going together with other states that would probably, you know, we can maybe talk about island states, or we can talk about Caribbean states that would like to engage, for instance, with the United States government in your particular case on issues that have to do with the human rights of migrants. You know, what kind of collaboration do you sort of see, whether it's coming from a regional organization level and that extends to the work that you have in the consular department in the ministry, or within your jurisdiction there at the embassy, or also just maybe within other functions, to sort of understand this cooperation between other states that brings particular you know, host countries in order to promote the rights of migrants. But we can, you know, give you some time to think about this and then come back to you on this particular question. And now let's just go to the other side. You know, we've just come from the Americas, and now we want to cross over to Asia and speak to Miss Ashu Basnet, who is the consular officer and the second secretary at the Embassy of Nepal in Malaysia. And we would, you know, before we ask her to unmute herself and to hear from her, Miss Ashu Basnet joined the Nepal Foreign Service in 2016. And she's currently the second secretary at the Embassy of Nepal, which is based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And for the last 5 years, she has worked in public service. She worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and particularly also looking at the Department of Passport of Nepal. So already understanding a lot of issues that are related to registration of citizens and various other issues. So she earned her bachelor degree in law from the Nepal Law Campus. Ms. Ashu, as we understand, you know, your embassy provides different services in Malaysia to your nationals with a focus on, you know, you've got a number of labor migrants from Nepal. You've got also the work around rescue and repatriation was obviously really enhanced during COVID. So we just wanted to get a sense from you, from your embassy coverage, what you sort of see as some of those critical elements in terms of the support that goes to migrants and diaspora communities. And also we wanted to understand in the services that are being provided in terms of assistance and protection, you know, what are those collaborative programs that you have? For instance, is it Ministry of Home Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Health, Labor Ministries, and also speaking into some of the non-state partners that you have on the ground with you there in Malaysia. Ms. Ashu, please feel free to share your reflections on these questions. Ashu, just check. I think you haven't unmuted yourself because we cannot hear you. You've unmuted yourself, but we still cannot hear you. Okay, we may have a slight internet problem. Ashu, if it's possible for you to just reconnect and come back. And I'll take this opportunity then maybe just to ask Ambassador if you can to just come back on that question that we gave. And then after that, we'll try to move to Ashu. If not, Namrati will be coming towards your direct. Oh, sorry, Ambassador. Ashu is here with us. Sorry about that, Ambassador. Go ahead, Ashu. We still cannot hear you. Could be, but we could see you, so that's great. So one step further. And participants, just to say for those joining us and listening and that are much more comfortable with Arabic, we know that we have participants joining us that would be much more comfortable with Arabic. We do have interpretation. We just ask that you go somewhere, if it's on your mobile device, there's somewhere where it says interpretation, and you can change to the right channel in order for you to follow us, and also just to invite participants to feel free to put your questions and reflections in the chat. We will have a moment in which we will engage with all our panelists, and indeed, as per practice, you will be able to speak. So we will be asking you to raise your hands just a little bit later on in the session. But please feel free for now to just share your reflections and questions into the chat. Just checking again if we have Ashu. Otherwise, Ambassador, just please go ahead and share with us.
If I may, one of the things that's important to us, we have a very vibrant, better said, a very vibrant CARICOM, the Caribbean community, has a very vibrant ambassadors caucus in Washington, D.C. And most of those people also represent their countries as permanent representatives in the Organization of American States. But one of the issues that is not common to us is that the migratory patterns and the issues that we have are not common to each state. Now, for example, Barbados does not have, it's very seldom, because the population is small, because our migrant population is also small. We don't have many of the issues that, that many other countries have, in terms of obviously our proximity to the United States, the fact that the United States has dubbed this as their third border. So a lot of what we do doesn't elicit much intervention on behalf of the embassy in terms of finding many people any day that are at the border, for example, collecting at the border, for example, as you get, for example, in Central America, for example. And therefore, we don't have some of the issues to deal with. We can tell you, though, is that whenever we have an issue where any of our migrants, any of our citizens fall into any issues at all, we constantly get a stream of actions, but mostly it's grounded in the situation where someone comes into the US. At times they are an illegal immigrant, and that they appeal then to the embassy. Sometimes you find people who come into legal problems and they're being deported out of the countries. And what they do is that they appeal to the embassy. We've had the situation where some people are not Barbadian but claim to be Barbadian, because if they're being deported, they want to be deported to a country that they believe can meet many of the needs that they have. So we don't have, I can't even quote for you on an ongoing basis a conglomerate of cases that we've got, which are really serious migratory challenges that some of our nationals have. But whenever there is an outreach, I can tell you that they come to the embassy, and the embassy has a personnel and a unit which specifically looks out for the issues that they deal with. But I can't cite for you any specific issues that we have on an ongoing basis that will elicit the type of information that you might have, for example, for someone coming from Central America or the like. We don't have a lot of that at all.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. And you know, just connecting to that response, Ashu, I don't know if you're ready for us, but let's cross over then and you know, speak a bit with Namrata Raju, who is the India Director for Equidem. Ashu, did we hear you speak? Okay, Ashu, we can have you just after Namrata, and just introducing Namrata, who is a labor migration expert, and she leads Equidem's work in India and collaborates closely with Equidem's initiatives across Southeast Asia, as well as East Africa and the GCC. And she has over a decade of experience working working in Oman, the country of her residence, for almost 2 decades, and has closely worked with the international labor organization towards the establishment of an internal labor migration unit. So with a lot of experience there with countries such as Sri Lanka and Maldives, and has also been a fellow at the Harvard University's Women and Public Policy program in 2017. So she comes with a lot of different aspects that she's very interested in and working on, looking at the area of remittances, the linkages between trafficking and migration, the future of work, informality and informal migration, but as well as understanding things like financial inclusion, indebtedness, and other concerns in the area of development. Now, Namrata, we just wanted to come to you because we know that Equidem's work is largely focused on the Arab Gulf, where sort of, you know, migrant worker perspective is your niche. And as a matter of fact, we are aware that you have some groundbreaking research that comes out. So, for instance, there's a launch tomorrow where you're going to look at the launch of the expo in Dubai and what labor migration looks like in the, you know, in the face of the glamorous expo. But we wanted for you to speak to us on these various subject areas, you know, that have to do with labor migration. And we know that there, you know, a compendium of many different issues that are there, you know, issues of distress, issues of psychosocial impact that's related to the pandemic on migrant workers. We're talking about working conditions. We know that even one of the partner organizations here has had a campaign where we're looking at wage theft. So really trying to understand what happens to migrants in terms of the end of service benefits and their returns home. So that's the effect of the pandemic, but really just looking at modern day slavery conditions as we see them, you know, also highlighted under the pandemic eye. In view of all these very important topics that you work around and you research around, really working on the ground, what do you see, Namrata, sort of as a consular services? How would we consider a kind of response to issues that you address in your research?
Thanks so much, Paddy, and it's an honor to be here in such esteemed company as well, and speaking on such an important platform. I mean, you've already given a brief background on us, but for context also on those on the call who don't know us, Equidem is essentially a human rights and labor rights organization, and one of the large things on which we work is on migration. And in recent years, we've been particularly focused, amongst others, sort of under a larger umbrella of work on migration into the Arab Gulf. And one of the larger things, Paddy, I think that this is globally true, but we see certain particularities with states when it comes to how the migrant workers. So I think that I'll just give a quick overview of what some of these impacts have been, and then look at how consular services can consider responding to some of these impacts. So through the research that we've done over the past 2 years during the pandemic, what we have seen is that, in a nutshell, any worker who has been marginalized or that is vulnerable in some form has essentially been pushed further to the margins. And this can hold true whether it's someone facing the related vulnerabilities, workers with the situation of undocumented workers come up earlier. One of the things that we keep seeing is that workers who were already vulnerable are even more vulnerable now. And one of the reasons is, of course, they tend to be excluded from rather the protections such as social protections, right? So this is on the one hand. And the other thing, and all of our research on the ground from the large countries, so we're talking about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, where the sort of ramparts of these economies are premised and built on large, very, very migrant workforce, most of whom low-wage migrants. And of course, we all know, many of you here will know this, that the story dates back to the oil boom of the 70s and 80s. Now, what we have witnessed during the pandemic, and Paddy, you alluded to this, is obviously the pandemic has placed a sort of a lot of financial stresses on industry. But as a consequence, a lot of workers have faced the non-payment of wages. So we have, for example, Migrant Forum in Asia, a fellow civil society organization that has been running the wage theft campaign, speaking about this, because imagine workers who have been working for 15 years, either their wages or their end of term benefits. So from the last report that came out from Equidem called The Cost of Contagion, which to our knowledge is sort of the largest recent report of primary data, which looks at these issues, we found certain sort of concrete things and concrete ways in which workers are facing discrimination. And then I'll get to shortly how we can respond to that in terms of consular services. So some of the things are, I just mentioned, benefits. The other is the psychosocial impacts on workers. Now, imagine the impacts, even sort of many of them are far removed from their families, being diaspora. So the kind of impacts that we saw were monumental, and the psychosocial impacts also being inextricably linked with the adverse financial impacts, especially that low-wage migrants in these countries were facing. The other things that we saw was that workers were paying extremely high recruitment fees. This is a story that used to exist before. Unfortunately, it continues. And you see sort of this go in fits and starts, like up and down in a cycle, as the recruitment cycle ebbs and flows. So when economies open up, for example, the Gulf countries open up, because now the pandemic restrictions are less, you see the recruitment cycles booming. And during those periods are when workers are paying exorbitant recruitment fees. And most of these fees, of course, they are illegal fees, which should be, as per the employer pays principle, taken on by employers rather than workers. And furthermore, it adds to indebtedness. So as per international labor standards and conventions and all of those things, we definitely identify debt bondage as highly prevalent, right? So one of the largest overarching problems over here that we see is that the countries, the different Gulf states, and in the context of Saudi, the UAE, and Qatar, a lot of these issues are systemic, right? These issues are structural. There are some reforms that have been coming out in recent times, which are looking to reform the system, which is the sponsor visa-based system. But it also seems to be still something that is still too much on paper and does not bridge the gap sufficiently, because some of the discrimination being faced by workers. This is just a big overview of what exactly we've been finding. And Equidem is also launching a report that Paddy referred to earlier. And we'd actually invite you all to the launch and keen to hear your feedback on the mega project in the UAE, which is the Dubai Expo, and the labor practices at the Expo. Now, very quickly, going to how Consular Services can respond to this, right? Now, I think Paddy hit the nail on the head when she spoke of sort of what happens with migrant workers and privilege. So from the assessment that we have so far, there is definitely, on the one hand, a hierarchy of discrimination. So for example, if someone is, like if a worker is Black or brown, more likely to face wage discrimination or earn less wages in the Middle East, especially like specific to the Gulf countries that I'm speaking here. And on the other hand, what we should be thinking of is how consular services can make sure that we're reaching now the most vulnerable. I was very excited to hear of the kind ambassador's comments on political, because I think that that is, for example, a very crucial aspect. One of the things we see from like large droves of workers who reside overseas, but they're sort of cut off from political participation, whether it is being able to vote. And in these, in the context of these countries, of course, in the works. The other things I would say that consular services can do, consider how to make responses more worker-centric. So essentially, when making an intervention, what does worker centricity mean? And I'll give you an example. So, and I'll speak specific to the Indian context now. In India, we do have a portal now for Mother Portal, wherein workers who are facing any sorts of issues overseas and can put their inputs on this portal, and consular services are to respond, depending, of course, on which country they're in. But, and while this is a great system to have, building on this would mean understanding that some workers in distress cannot actually grapple with a gestation period. Like if the gestation period or turnaround time in responding to a worker overseas, if it goes beyond a certain amount of time, it could mean that the worker faces harm. It could mean that, God forbid, the worker perishes because they're facing some kind. This is what I mean by worker centricity. And I think that if consular services are thinking about how to respond to some of these issues, and I'm speaking again from the Indian context, where we have a large number of low-wage workers in regions like the Gulf. So it's different, of course, to the Barbados situation. Interesting to think about. But this is one of the things we need to think about. The other things that we could still do, and sorry, I know that I've droned on for a long time, and I hope I haven't bored you all, but one of the things that I think is very, very useful from Equidem's research is even things like labor inspections, even things like seeing what are the working conditions which workers are in at the moment. And again, during the pandemic, as per research on the ground, that this is essentially deteriorated. Worker conditions, for example, whether it was accommodation and things like that, prior to the pandemic were problematic. But now they become even more problematic given the context of if you have 15 workers in a room and we're talking about an era of social distancing, what exactly does that mean? I think that's mainly about it. Thank you so much. Over to you, Paddy, for any further questions or comments.
Namrata, thank you for enlightening us, on not just the work that you do, but making this very important linkage to what are the needs on the ground. And I think that, we have had very interesting discussions around recruitment, the processes of recruitment, and, even going as far as talking about fair and ethical recruitment, which is mentioned explicitly in the GCM. But also, I think, working in this space, that there's a lot of conversation around ethical recruitment and what that actually spells out. So seeing these linkages, not just for our students, but also understanding the connections that the GCM objectives have, essentially very important, because that's where we find out where some of the needs are. And I think in terms of labor migration, I think that there's a lot that needs to be understood, I think, and a lot of information that has to move from research, a function such as yourself, the research hands from yourselves, that moves on to consular, being on the ground and working together with migrants from a different wavelength. So thank you very much for shedding light. I think what a comeback question, we would come back to you a little later on as you would reflect also, is trying to sort of understand what you see as a collective action. I mean, we do know that there are quite a number of countries, whether they're from Asia or from Africa, that have their citizens going into the GCC as migrant workers, and often some of the issues that are around forced labor, or that are around labor exploitation, or what we're calling modern day slavery, are coming out not just because they're related to particular nationalities, but could also be across the board. So the question I think that we want to come back to you is, from the part of government, what do you see sort of are these collective efforts to sort of say, if these are the issues that are coming out of labor migrants that are from different countries, what kind of collective efforts are being seen on the ground from various functions. And it could be consuls, it could be also regional organizations. It could also be, I'm also thinking a bit here about the Abu Dhabi dialogue. How much of what you talk about goes to governments in that kind of a space where things are being engaged in? Or are we also talking about, regional spaces and global spaces that don't have teeth, and what kind of teeth do we need in this space to crunch this very issue that comes and hinders migrants from having access to their human rights, particularly in the space of labor migration. So it would really be nice, it would really be great to hear from you, some of your reflections when we come back to this, in terms of kind of completing the cycle and the picture. I know we could, unpack this a lot. And I thought that, it's a good time as well in this point to go back and check if we can check again with Ashu, sitting in Malaysia and as a consul, Ashu, some of the issues that come to the consul. I mean, we do know that in the space of in some countries you have a specific labor attaché, for instance, that is attached. But then in most embassies you would have the consul managing everything from registration to to ensuring that there's support that's even to visits, for instance, for migrants that have been put in prison and so on and so forth. So we wanted to understand from you, Ashu, from the questions that we sent it. Ashu, are you able to join us? Ashu, just give us a hands up and just speak and let us know if you are there. If not, we cross over in the interest of time to Jordan. Yes, Ashu, please go ahead.
Hi, Paddy. Can you hear me?
Hi, excellent. Hi, Ashu. You're
Finally.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Paddy. Thank you. Holding on. It was quite a task to join. Thank you so much, Paddy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be part of this series of webinar. Today, I will be focusing on the role of embassy in providing consular protection to Nepali migrant. So when I say migrant, I will be focusing on the labor migrant here. So I believe our role is in line with the objective 14 of GCM. So I will be focusing on what is our role,
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
Paddy, if possible, to unmute Ghalwa because she cannot translate. She cannot unmute herself. Unmute Ghalwa so she can do the interpretation.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Farah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ashu.
Yeah. I believe you can see me as well.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I'm on mobile, so it's not very, I guess it's better I talk this way, okay? So basically, let me give you a brief background where we stand in terms of labor migrant. We have around 200,000 Nepali workers here in Malaysia. So you can understand the work that we have in the embassy. So when we say about the consular protection, which is our major focus area as a part of embassy, as a part of embassy official, as a consular officer, of course, we have separate labor attaché, but all our forces are focused on providing consular protection, rescue to the labor migrant. So we are very, in terms of number, we have very insignificant number of privileged migrant. Here we have around 200,000 labor migrants. So our focus is on that. So what kind of consular protection, one kind of work we do is, when a worker comes to Malaysia, or when they, there are few problems, there's like multiple problems actually. The first problem would be there's a chances of, contract substitution. Whatever they promise, they might not get. The terms and conditions are not what they were promised. Sometimes their passport are taken away. Sometimes, the working condition is not as expected. So when they face the problems, they come to embassy. So we as an embassy really focus on being visible. It's very important for embassy. Sometimes people do not know that we exist, so visibility, accessibility is very important. So as embassy, we focus on being visible among the people. We try to connect to them through social medias, I think we are among one of the very few embassies who every week we come on Facebook, we conduct a program, we show ourselves, we present ourselves in such a way that we're here to serve you. So that is very important, accessibility of, workers to embassy is very important. So we focus on that, it's easy access is very important. They can contact us through phones, social media, emails, our hotline numbers. That is very important. I think that is a very important critical element of social, consular support. A second would be very important thing is, sometimes due to various circumstances, they lose their passport, travel document, So our one of the very important job is, first of all, to identify that the person who is claiming to be a Nepali is a Nepali national. After that, we have to issue a document for them. And thirdly, our job is, if there's chances of contract substitution, so we have to deal with the employers here in the situation. First we try to understand the situation. What is the problem with the between the employee and the worker? And secondly, we talk to the employers. Sometimes, I'm not saying about all the employers are, they are involved in all kind of mistakes, but there are some employers, they are. So in that situation, we have to call up employers, we have to talk to them, try to resolve the issue amicably. If not, sometimes we also have to, threaten, in a sense that, your company might be blacklisted if you do not follow your obligations. These are some of the ways, tactics that we use, to resolve the matters. This is also one of the consular services that we provide, that is very important. Other thing is that, of course, they are sometimes in need of medical assistance. We all know that labor migrants are vulnerable. They might be denied of sometimes medical assistance. So embassy comes into play at that time as well. And also our major focus is on, we understand that when the person is in the third country, in the labor destination, they might not be safe as they are in their home country. So we focus on repatriation. Repatriation is very important part of embassy. We work in collaboration with the government agency in Malaysia to repatriate our workers. So as I said, that embassy alone cannot do. We definitely have to collaborate with the government agencies in Malaysia, whether it's Home Ministry, Foreign Affairs, labor ministries, and in times of pandemic, of course, Health Ministry. During this pandemic time, we collectively, not Nepal embassy in individual, but collectively urged the government to involve foreign workers for vaccination into this vaccination drive. That was very important, and luckily, fortunately, government was positive enough for that as well. Besides that, we also provide legal assistance when they are in need. Embassy cannot represent directly. Of course, we hire lawyers and everyone. They're non-state actors. We hire lawyer for them. They do their job. So of course, that is also our part. Besides that, also repatriation of the dead bodies, that is also very important. Working to get compensation for the workers at the time of need. So these are all case by case basis. This is not a particular thing. Okay? These are some of the work that embassy has been doing to the full capacity. Of course, there are some challenges that we have been facing, but yes, these are some of the work that embassy has been doing and focused on doing this all the time.
Apologies for that. Between the interpreters and myself, somehow we have got ourselves locked into muting and unmuting each other. So sincere apologies for that. Ashru, thank you very much for sharing onto the work that you're doing as the as the Embassy of Nepal based in Malaysia. And I think very interesting to sort of hear all the way from registration to repatriation when, you know, when the outcome has obviously when there's been a loss of life. And maybe one of our questions that would come back to you as we will rope back soon into the audience is to find out from you what's sort of happening in terms of, you know, spaces where somebody has not been documented. So, you know, repatriation obviously would involve a family member on the other side. And I think the GCM also calls on to kind of that support, not only in this particular objective, but talking about, I mean, in another context where we're talking about saving lives, but for those migrants that are found sort of reunited with families in one way or another, whether we are, you know, reuniting remaining family that is in Malaysia, let's say, for instance, if children have been left behind, a labor migrant, connecting them to an actual family. But in spaces where there's an undocumented migrant, I think it would be interesting to hear from you what kind of pathways you have taken on. And also we wanted to hear a little bit more about how you're engaging with your own diaspora. I mean, knowing that there must be quite a wealth of diaspora in Malaysia that is from Nepal, and how they engage and support in terms of some of the work that you're doing around advocating, for instance, on safe migration, because this is also another area I think that's kind of important. So it would be great for us to hear from you. Before we would move to the panel and to the discussion, and I highlight the discussion because it's good for us to think about those questions, I would like to invite our last but not the least panelist, and she is going to zoom into a very more you know, journey us a bit, Jrfdt, into this personal experience, starting off as a Jordanian union organizer from Jrfdt, and all the way to working with different you know, different migrants and trying to understand what their plight is, particularly working with migrants working in the clothing industry in Jordan, where she has been organizing a union and working around advocacy. So I'm delighted to ask Jrfdt, if you could just, you know, tell us about your experience, you know, your journey to being this trade union organizer in Jordan. You know, what kind of, can you also highlight a bit some of the challenges maybe that you saw in terms of when you engaged with employees or with migrants in terms of understanding that they actually have rights, and especially talking to us about migrant workers, you know, what kind of challenges did you face into the work that you do very actively so now, and also trying to, you know, speak to us a bit about some of the opportunities. Hi, Jrfdt, can you hear us? Okay, and for everyone, I would just ask you to turn on for interpretation. If you need to listen in English, you go to the interpretation button. There are two buttons, English and
كنت
Arabic.
أعمل سابقا في كعاملة خياطة في بعض المصانع، ومن حوالي 11 سنة توجهت للعمل النقابي بناء على طلب رئيس النقابة أن أعمل معهم في المكتب النقابي. ومن هنا بدأت تجربتي في العمل مع العمال المهاجرين. العمال المهاجرين في الأردن ما يقارب في قطاع الملابس ما يقارب حوالي 60,000 عامل في أكثر من مدينة في الأردن يعملون. بعضهم من 9 جنسيات مختلفة من جنوب شرق آسيا وأيضا من أفريقيا، وعندنا عاملات منازل أيضا كمان من أفريقيا وجنوب شرق آسيا. كانت تجربتي في البداية أنه صعبة جدا بسبب طريقة أو اللغة حوالي 9 أو 10 لغات، ولا يمكن أن أتحدث إلا بالإنجليزي، وهم أيضا لا يتحدثون، أكثرهم لا يتحدثون اللغة الإنجليزية. فكان من الصعب، العائق الأول كان هو اللغة وكيفية التواصل مع بعض. لكن مع تجربتي مع يعني أريد أن أتكلم أنني كنت دائما أحاول التواصل مع العمال بطريقة في الميدان، لا أجلس خلالها في المكتب. كنت أذهب إلى العمال في مهاجعهم وخلال استراحاتهم في المصانع وفي الشوارع، فتعرفت عليهم أكثر. واستطعت أن أعرف أكثر عن المشاكل التي يواجهونها وما هي الانتهاكات التي يواجهونها خلال العمل أو خارج ميدان العمل. اشتغلت معهم في كثير من الأمور، تابعتهم مع الشرطة، في المحاكم، في الضمان الاجتماعي، في المستشفيات، مع الأطباء، في السجون. كان كثير عملنا بصراحة صعب، وخصوصا إنه العدد الكبير من العمال المهاجرين أعدادهم كبيرة، ومش كثير الناس اللي عم بيشتغلوا معي لحتى إنه ناخذ وقت نكفي للجميع. لكن الحمد لله إنه أكثر العمال المهاجرين صار في كثير تواصل بيني وبينهم، وصاروا بيعرفوا لوين يتوجهوا. بس يعني إحنا ما راح أحكي إنه الحياة كثير وردية في الأردن بالنسبة للعمال المهاجرين، خصوصا في قطاع الملابس وعاملات المنازل. بس أحسن، في تقدم، ولكن تقدم بطيء جدا، خصوصا إنه أكثر المنظمات المجتمع المدني والنقابات صارت تعتني كثير بأمور العمال المهاجرين. لكن لحد الآن بواجه صعوبات كثير ومشاكل كثير مع العمالة، وانتهاكات كثير بينهم وبين أصحاب العمل. طبعا يعني في بعض المشاكل عم نحلها وديا بين أصحاب العمل وبين العمال، ولكن أحيانا نلجأ للقضاء وبيساعدوني في شركاء من منظمات المجتمع المدني بيساعدونا في المسائل القانونية والدعاوي. لكن الوضع بيكون كتير صعب، إنه المحاكم عم تاخذ كتير أوقات، 3 و4 و5 سنين، وهي العمال ممكن يعود لبلده ولسه ما حصل على حقه. بالنسبة للضمان الاجتماعي، الكل عمال القطاع الألبسي كلهم ملتزمين في الضمان الاجتماعي، لأنه القانون بيجبر أصحاب العمل إنهم يلزمهم في الضمان الاجتماعي. بس في عندنا مشاكل لبعض العمال الغير موثقين ما بيقدروا يحصلوا على ضمانهم الاجتماعي عند عودتهم لبلدهم، لأنه من شروط الحصول على الضمان الاجتماعي لازم وزارة العمل توافق على إعطائك الموافقة للحصول على الضمان، وإذا ما معك تصاريح عمل فأنت ما راح تحصل على ضمانك الاجتماعي. في كتير عمال عم بيعودوا لوطنهم دون الحصول على الضمان الاجتماعي اللي تم اقتطاعه خلال سنوات شغلهم هنا. كتير واجهت مشاكل بصراحة، أو بينت المشاكل أكثر بجائحة كورونا. في جائحة كورونا يمكن كان دور السفارات الموجودة عندنا للعمال وضحت أكثر إنها شوية فقيرة في تقديم المساعدة للعمال، من حيث إنه كان وجود العمال الأجور كانت متدنية، ما في عندهم عمل إضافي لتوقيف التصدير لفترة، كان عندهم مشاكل مالية للعمال. كان في أعداد كبيرة من العمال المهاجرين أنهوا عقودهم خلال عام 2020 وظلوا فترة طويلة ما يقارب السنة في المهاجع، ما معهم أي دخل مالي، بينتظروا المطارات حتى تفتح وحتى يجلوهم لدولهم. في كثير من العمال ما قدروا يوصلوا للرعاية الصحية خلال الحظر، أو مثل المستشفيات، أو الحصول على الدواء والفيتامينات إذا كانوا مصابين، وكان كتير صعب إنه ولا حدا كان يقدم لهم المساعدة. فكتير كنا إحنا بنحاول التواصل مع أي حالات طوارئ لحتى نوصل لمساعدتهم. أنا ما بنكر إنه في عدد منهم صار في وفيات بسبب جائحة كورونا. في عنا كتير موارد ما في مثل عمال المنازل، هم أكثرهم غير قانونيين وبيشتغلوا بدون وثائق. هدول العمال ما كان معهم أي دخل مالي لحتى يحصلوا على الطعام خلال سنة 2020، وكنا عم نندفع إنه إحنا نوفر لهم أي دخل مالي من السكان الأردن هون، تبرعات لحتى نوصلهم الطعام يعني بشكل دوري لحتى يقدروا يعيشوا ويكملوا حياتهم، لأنه كان الشغل متوقف عند كل المنازل، وكانوا أصحاب المنازل متخوفين من نقل الفيروس، فكان على العمال كتير صعوبة أنهم يدفعوا إيجارات المنازل أو يحصلوا على الطعام والأدوية والأشياء اللي بيحتاجوها. في كتير أنا بتمنى يعني من السفارات هي عم بتقدم مساعدات، ولكن المساعدات غير كافية. المساعدات يعني من حيث إنه في عندنا عاملة سريلانكية تزوجت من عامل هندي وأنجبت، وظلينا 5 أشهر عم نحاول مع السفارة السريلانكية لحتى نحصل على وثيقة سفر للمولود الجديد. والأم لما شافت ابنها غير بعد 5 أشهر لأنها كانت بالسجن هي وزوجها، ولحتى حصلنا على وثيقة سفر علشان ترجع لبلدها هي والطفل. في عمال بنغلاديشيين كانت مصابة بالسرطان، وبصراحة يعني إحنا توجهنا للسفارة، وكمان من بنغلاديش تواصلوا مع السفارة، والسفارة ما عملت أي شيء للعاملة البنغلاديشية. وإحنا كتير كان صعب علينا إنه نتواصل مع المستشفى وبدهم مصاري عشان يعالجوها. في عوائق كتير مع السفارات، إنه السفارات مش دائما عم تحاول الاستماع لرعاياها، يعني ما بيطلبوا إنهم يستمعوا لرعاياهم نهائي. يعني كأنه المشكلة عند العمال مش كتير أهم من إنه يحافظ على الدبلوماسية بينه وبين الأردن. فبتمنى يعني إنه شوي تتخذ الإجراءات بجدية أكثر من ضمن السفارات اللي موجودة في الأردن. ففي كتير عندي مشاكل بنواجهها مع السفارات، وأنا مش عارفة بصراحة كيف ممكن نغطي هاي المشاكل، وخصوصا إنه المنظمات عندنا يعني بطريقة صريحة أحكي معاكي، المنظمات عندنا مش كتير بتفرض على الحكومات أنها تتخذ إجراءات ضد تجاه هذول العمال الأجانب، لأنه بتخاف يكون ممكن في تخريب للعلاقات بينها وبين الأردن. وهذا كتير بأثر على العمال المهاجرين. يعني العمال المهاجرين مش بيلاقوا ولا حدا يوقف معاهم نهائي، لا نقابات ولا منظمات ولا مجتمع مدني عم بيقدر إنه يحل لهم كل مشاكلهم. فلهيك يعني كتير الوضع صعب مع العمال المهاجرين، وهم كتير ضعيفين جدا وبتخوفوا من أي شيء، ودائما بتهددوا بالشرطة إنهم يسجنوهم من قبل أصحاب العمل. إذا ما رد أو ما سمع لكلام صاحب العمل رح يتم سجنه من قبل الشرطة. وكثير العمال بيعانوا من هاي المشاكل. فإنه يعني عم بحاول قدر الإمكان إنه نكون معاهم دائما، بس بعتذر إنه ما في حدا بالأردن كثير ممكن يشتغل على مدى 24 ساعة مع العمال المهاجرين مثل ما أنا بشتغل، لأنه هم بدهم 24 ساعة يكون متاحة لهم خلال الهاتف أو خلال الشغل في المكتب أو خلال الشغل في الميدان. وأنا بعتذر إنه أنا ما في ممكن أنا وزميلي إلي فقط إنه إحنا بنقدر نتبع وراء العمال، بس في كتير عمال مش بنقدر نوصل لهم، في كتير عمال مش بيقدروا يعرفوا وين يروحوا وين يتجهوا، في كتير عمال مفقودين بالسجون. بعرف إنه بعض السفارات بتروح بتزورهم بالسجون بتأمن لهم تذاكر، ولكن مش بالقدر الكافي. في بعض العمال كانوا 3 سنين مسجونين بس عشان بدهم تذكرة سفر وما حدا عارف وين هم. فالأهالي فقدت الاتصالات مع أبنائها وبناتها وما حدا بيعرف ولا إشي. فأنا كنت بتمنى إنه من الجميع، من منظمات، من مجتمع مدني، من سفارات، إنه ما بدنا بس ضلنا نكتب تقارير دائما إحصائيات وتقارير. بدنا نعمل إشي جدي فعلا بالميدان، يعني مش بس ناخذ تصورات وخلاص. العمال كتير بحاجة لحدا يساعدهم، العمال بحاجة كتير لحدا يسمع لهم. في حالات انتحار عم بتصير، الصحة النفسية سيئة جدا، التحرش موجود، والعمال مش بيعرفوا كيف يتصرفوا بدول غير دولتهم، دول تانية يعني. فأنا بعتذر عن إطالتي للموضوع، في أشياء كتير ممكن تنحكى بس بكون أحسن هيك. شكرا لكم.
Jrfdt, we want to sincerely thank you for your candidness and your openness to share on what is happening on the ground from your work. And so please, thank you very much for being this candid and being very authentic in sharing with us from your side. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to outline for us the various gaps that are there in terms of reaching the goals that GCM objective number 14 has. So this very globally agreed objective, when we look at it on the ground from your side, we can see what the disconnections are like. And I think it's forums like this and beyond, like you have said, we have to do more than the talking that will move some of these objectives to the next level. And so as we will come back to you, when we ask for your reflections later, it would be interesting to hear from you what you think the future looks like, and the steps that you think are really critical for us to move forward. I know it's a big question, but I'm sure that you have been doing a lot of thinking, around each and every case that comes your way. I really appreciate what you've also said about, embassy support being not enough, writing reports is not enough, and essentially that speed is critical in terms of us, seeing this objective through from a whole of society approach, supporting a whole of government approach. So thanks a lot, Mervat, for sharing this. And now we'll take an opportunity to engage with the audience, because there's a lot of questions that are in the chat. I encourage the participants to also just have a look if you have the possibility. But as per GCM webinar tradition, we open the floor, and because the interpreter has the floor, just lift your hand up, and you will be unmuted so that you could share your question. And while we're waiting for a hand up, because we really are counting the minutes, there was a question that came from Ngozi, and it's great that he's picked his hand. Ngozi, please go ahead and share with us. Agalwa, could you please unmute Ngozi or give me back the co-hosting? Thank you.
Hello?
Please go ahead, Ngozi.
Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, Mrs. Juba from Ecuador, that was a very good presentation. Like I just put in the chat box there, could you please enlighten us if there are some organizations or some group that you collaborate with in doing some advocacy job and to effect changes in the plight of the migrant workers? If you have some, do you have any success stories? Please let us know. And also to the ambassador, we appreciate your presentation. And my question there is short. How do you cater for the people from Barbados who are wrongfully jailed in any part of the world, especially in the USA? In the past, I've asked when we have somebody from that region to tell us what is happening, especially in the Hispaniola Island, because a lot of things going on along that border. Thank you.
Ngozi, thank you for that. Joanne, Gloria?
Thank you very much, Ms. Paddy, for this wonderful work that you're doing for us. And thank you also our facilitators for today's work. Mine is not a question really, but I just want to give a reflection that I have on this topic today. I want to say that this topic is one of the most relevant to what we are going through in terms of migration or migrant workers in search of labor. So what I wanted to mention about the protection is that, for instance, here in Kenya, we have had like the labor attaches in various countries, especially the GCC countries. Also, we have bilateral labor agreements with some of the GCC countries like Qatar, UAE, and also Saudi Arabia. But as much as we have done those few mitigation issue that it's going to help our people out there, we still see and hear many of our migrant workers being mistreated. Some have the contract alteration. We can hear some are dying out there. So we can ask ourselves, as much as we have done this little to maybe say that it's a mitigating measure for the migrant workers, those who go out there to the GCC countries, because it has been established now that GCC countries is one of the popular countries that our migrant workers go. Maybe because it's because of it's easy to access those places and availability of jobs. So therefore, as much as we have done those few things to help our migrant workers, we still hear this mistreatment that they undergo. So I want to say that maybe these are the gaps that we need to see into it, that it is being faced on or tackled by the government, to ensure that as much as we have the bilateral agreements, maybe they can have an effective way of checking time to time to see if they are implemented, or also to implement, to ensure that the labor attaches are in connection with the embassies of our countries, and also the migrant themselves, especially those who are documented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne. Gloria. I think a very important reflection there in terms of monitoring and follow-up. I think in terms of the reports that are coming out and complaints, so what, you know, the complaints mechanisms and the role of Consul and governments through Consul. Oludare, and then we have Grace.
Thanks a lot, Paddy. Thanks a lot, Paddy, for the good job being done. My own contribution is actually directed to the ambassador. I'm so much fascinated with the way in which he has painted his country, that is Barbados. I live in Nigeria here, and for us in this part of the world, Barbados is like a land that exists in the fairyland. Something we do read in the fairy tales, and he has put it so graphically. I just want to say that the way he has painted the country, that he has made it very, very attractive to me as a person. Possibly one day I'm going to pay a visit as a tourist and possibly migrate there. I just want to ask him, what is the ambience like for migrants in Barbados? What is the space like for them? Is it austere? Is it comfortable? Is it friendly? How is it in Barbados? I said that it's a small country of 350,000 people, which is like just a tiny city in Nigeria here. So I just want to ask how the ambience is for migrants in Barbados.
Oludare, thank you very much. I think you're putting Ambassador on the spot there in his role of marketing his own country, which is something I think which is up his sleeve, having read his bio. So thank you very much for sharing that question. We'll be hearing more. Ms. Grace, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Paddy. This is the first time I'm taking the floor. Yes, I think you've noticed that I've been here. But anyway, the topic is very close to my heart because I'm a retired ambassador. 12 years in the Middle East. I was in Abu Dhabi and then in the Vatican, my last posting. So we have another ambassador here. So tomorrow we will be signing into existence our new department for migrant workers. As you know, the Philippines is one of the top countries of origin. So I've heard all of this. I've done all of them, been to the prison, connected with the diaspora. So all of this is really good for all of us. But I was just thinking the good practices, and that's why I think that IMRF will be important. So we in the Philippines, as I think others know, we try to be ahead of times because we are in 200 countries. 10 million of our 100 million Filipinos are out, 11% of our GDP. So we're trying to maximize the gains and minimize the pain. So we're talking of ethical recruitment practices, more bilateral agreements, and we have a presidential elections this year, so we are coordinating with our migrants for not just their financial remittances, but social remittances, how to elect people with governance who are for migrant workers too. So these are the things that I think we can compare, and congratulations to the new country of Barbados. I hope I can also visit there. But yes, all this talk, I've seen it all somehow. I evacuated Filipinos out of Iraq during the US-Iraq war. So this is something that we should be working together. And the lady from Jordan, I can understand what she's going through. This is what we have to be together, huh? People-centered, right-centered, but really the migrants and their concerns. We're just here to help them, especially the embassies. They're very important because they're the ones who do the passports and who send them home. And for us now, we sent home 800,000 Filipino migrants. We tried our best. We gave them cash incentives. So we're trying to do more. And that's why we have a new department. Thank you so much. And congratulations to all of us. God bless.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grace. And just, in last year's webinar, actually, we had a consul to UAE last time, Honorable Paul, joining us from the Philippines. So we do, and we have hosted Philippines several times on this webinar. So we understand Philippines, I think, in the migration space as one of the gold standards. And now here we're hearing about how I think Barbados is setting a trend in terms of governance. So I think your congratulations, going back also your way as well for the splendid work I think that has been done over the last years, not just highlighting, for instance, the role of women in migration with, placing domestic workers really at the center of some of the work that is being done in terms of migrants protection work. So thank you so much, Ms. Grace, for joining us today. Oludare, if I see that, I think, Oludare, that must be an old hand that hasn't come up. So with that in mind, I would just like to ask our speakers to give us some reflections, because I would like to hand over to some of our eminent speakers in the house to welcome our participants, but also to be able to share their reflections. So Professor Binod and Dr. Raj will come in just after we get some reflections. Ambassador, can we hear from you? Honorable Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, Patty, thank you very much. I hate to call you Patty. I hate to call you by your first name, but I hope I didn't paint a false picture of a fairy tale existence in Barbados for most of your participants. I will tell you that Barbados has prided itself for a long time. Small country, but we were once rated as the #1 developing country in the world, and that was said by not only did the indices, the UN indices denote that, but Kofi Annan, who was a former Secretary General of the UN, visited Barbados and talked about a country that punched way above its weight in terms of what that country could produce. Now, that said, we're not perfect in any way. We're not a perfect country. And I encourage all of you to visit. But one of the things that we've been doing is, I think Barbados has prided itself on being away from the herd. We are the one country in the world. I don't think there's any other country in the world that has a female president, a female prime minister, and a female deputy prime minister. All three people that run Barbados from the political standpoint. The president, the prime minister, and the deputy prime minister are all female. Now that in itself opens up avenues of opportunity for a glass ceiling that was established years ago. And we're trying to break through that glass ceiling. And our prime minister, who has been at the center of this movement, has outlined. I also believe fundamentally that women are more meticulous than men when it comes to the issues that really matter in development. And I think women pay more attention to the detail, and that we prided ourselves on that. But coming back to the issues, a lot of your speakers this morning outlined and really created for us the huge separation that we have in different parts of the world as it relates to migrants and how migrants are treated and how migrants interface with the populations in which they exist. Barbados doesn't have a large migrant worker program. For example, we have an officer and a unit in our consulate in Miami. And that person is responsible for looking for opportunities for Barbadians to work. And mostly they come in the hospitality sector. So the number of Barbadians who work on cruise ships, who work on hotels, or restaurants in the United States. Now that is a program that's an established program, and the visa program, but we've never had many complaints about treatment of migrant workers in our space. I was also privy to be in a meeting with our Prime Minister Motley and the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, last year, in which, because of the supply chain issues, there are a number of gaps in the United States. Truck drivers, some other hospitality workers, in which they can't meet the demand that they have. And she outlined to the Prime Minister, and we discussed the probability of a work program, a migrant work program, which is now being established. But I will tell you, by and large, Caribbean countries do not face many of the issues up front. At least it's not been said that other parts of like folks from Asia face, folks from even South and Central America face in the United States. But I will close with this. I think one of the things that governments have got to be very diligent on is speaking out on the issues. Lobbying and advocacy is fundamental through your embassies. I find that, and I'll be very candid with you, that when we speak about large developed countries, we sometimes seem to be afraid to speak out and say, what are the downsides of their own existence that affect us where we are? I find that there are, for example, the Black Lives Movement in the United States. You know, people who are Black and brown people need to get involved in looking out for all the needs of Black and brown people wherever they're found. And I find fundamentally that sometimes we seem to be apprehensive about how we represent the interests of Black people and brown people where they gather. And if you create a movement around these, I think a lot of the issues that you deal with and that we've talked about this morning in terms of Black and brown people will suddenly dissipate, will suddenly start to treatment of people, being able to allow them not to get the same salaries and wages as other people within their space. But we've got to start representing better how we look out for each other as Black and brown people across the globe. Unless we do that, and lobbying specifically in major capitals to the fight of the plight and the fight of Black and brown people. I like the concept, maximizing the gains and minimizing the pains. Unless we do that, our Prime Minister, finally, very quickly, has started, for the first time, any country, we have established missions in Kenya. We've established a mission in Ghana. We have established a mission in the UAE, and we have established a mission in Morocco, and we're going to establish one in South Africa, because Black people of African descent have got to have more tangible relationships with people of their ancestry than we've ever done before. And Ms. Motley has said, the Prime Minister said, listen, we've been talking about this for too long. Let's establish proper diplomatic relations that opens up market access for a lot of these people to be able to move freely, to be able to trade in goods and services, to be able to do things that brings tangible expression to the issues of not only looking north, but starting to look south trade in terms of how we deal with the globe. And I think Barbados has started to establish that. We're the only country in the Caribbean that has established these missions in Africa. And I'm saying that unless you're able to look out for people wherever they gather of African descent, you're never going to get all the other supportive measures that go along with making people's lives more comfortable and moving towards full development. I thank you. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those reflections. Namrata, can we have some reflections from your side in terms of the questions that have been asked? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I was speaking with my mic muted. And again, this has been such an interesting discussion, and I've been learning so much here. So thank you to all the speakers and the participants. Just some quick reflections. So I think the ambassador sort of hit the nail on the head for me when talking about, some of these issues. Like, why is it that people of color are facing discrimination wherever they are in the world? Why is it it's someone who's Black or brown or, you know, from Southeast Asia, as examples, there are so many more that are facing certain types of structural discrimination. And actually, for me, Paddy, this links to a question that you asked, like, you know, in terms of what do we do now? Where do we go from here? And I think that the answer is, of course, there's no one clear-cut solution. So one is that civil society, forums like this need to keep existing. Civil society needs to keep engaging with each other, both locally and globally, because one of the very interesting things from this pandemic, and that this pandemic has surfaced on such a large scale, is that worker distress is obviously not only focused on one country, or it's not localized only to a particular context. It's a global phenomenon. So why is it that workers everywhere who are marginalized are facing further marginalization? Where is it that our systems have failed? I think that this is the question that we essentially need to grapple with. Like Jrfdt spoke so much about social protection. This is one of the biggest failings of our larger systems. I think I'm not saying that this is necessarily a country-specific thing now. This is something that the labor movement needs to ask itself globally. So one thing is that we need to keep having conversations. This is within civil society. This is even with the private sector. And I think Gozi asked a really good question, which is, what are success stories out of it? Look, I don't think that there's one-size-fits-all solution to any of these really thorny, some very complicated problems. But what we have seen is that there are definitely actors and stakeholders from the private sector that are willing to engage in this idea of, okay, so what does sustainable business look like? And we know that our supply chain has various discrepancies. We know that there are hugely problematic things within our supply chain, but what do we do now to assess that? So one example is some of our success stories are actually working with different, Equirem has a consulting side, which is separate, which is a labor rights consultancy. And essentially what we do is do things like map the supply chain. Where are the crucial points in which workers are most vulnerable? You know, how does this comply with international standards and conventions? And essentially any supply chain is always the strongest when your protections are actually not the lowest common denominator, but basically any company or any corporate is looking to ensure that the rights of the worker who's furthest away, like so for example, furthest away from the retail store, say it's shoes or say it's clothes. I'm just making these things up, but that's one thing to look at. And the other thing is that engagement with governments also does work sometimes. But what we need, one example is, and sorry, I realize I've spoken a lot, I'll just pause here shortly. But basically things like we did some work with Qatar, the Qatari government, to set up a wage fund. So what this fund looks at is things like, if a company goes bankrupt, we still need to ensure that workers get paid. So how do we do that? And that's essentially what this looks at, right? So I think that what we have to do is all of us keep working in whatever capacity that we can, and keep pushing. Like some examples, some great examples also from the Nepal, Madam Ashu, and what she was saying as well. So I think that that's a summary. Like we all just need to keep doing our best, and also thinking what a synergy looks like in the global neighbor movement. How can India link to Barbados, for example? Okay, sorry for the long answer, but over and out.
Thank you, Namrata. That was very, very useful for us to hear your reflections and some very critical examples I think that you have shared with us. So thank you for sharing. Jrfdt?
Okay. أنا بحب أشكركم جدا على دعوتي للمشاركة في هاي الفعالية. مش عندي شيء كتير أضيفه، بس أنا بفهم إنه إن شاء الله رح يكون في شيء أفضل مستقبلا، ورح أحاول أكتب شو الأشياء اللي ممكن تساعدنا في التوجه لمناصرة العمال ودعمهم أفضل من هيك، وإن شاء الله رح أبعث لكم إياهم. وبتمنى بس بتمنى إنه شوي أكثر ناخذ الموضوع بطريقة جدية من قبل حكومات الدول المرسلة وسفارات الدول المرسلة، وفي طرق كتير ممكن نوجدها إنه نساعد العمال فيها بطريقة حتى لو كانت فقط يعني دعم نفسي أكثر من أي شيء تاني. أنا بعرف إنه الأمور المالية كتير محدودة، ولكن الدعم النفسي كتير عم بيأثر على العمال المهاجرين، واللي هم في مؤخرا بآخر سنوات صارت نفسيتهم كتير صعبة، وعم بتعرضوا لضغوطات من قبل العمل ومن قبل العائلات في دولهم، واللي عم بتوجهوا فيها للانتحار أو الإصابة بتجلطات قلبية أو دماغية والموت وعدم العودة لأهاليهم إلا جثة. فبتمنى إن شاء الله أنه يكون في أمور أفضل جميعنا نوجدها لحتى نساعد هاي العمال المهاجرين على طريق أحسن، طريق أفضل، طريق جميل لهم ولنا جميعا. شكرا كثير على مشاركتي بهاي الدعوة.
Jrfdt, thank you for sharing that reflection on that optimistic note, one would say, you know, in terms of better days for the future. And indeed, also for all the other panelists, we would say that please feel free to share with us all your future events, reports, links that you would like us to be more aware of the work that is happening around in your spaces. Thank you for sharing on these links, because we'll be able to share them onto the other platform even after this Zoom call is done. So do feel free to come back to us with any resources that you would like to share with us. And at this point, I would just like to get some reflections. We will start with the president of Jrfdt, Professor Binod Kadria, to share with us his reflections.
Thank you, Paddy, for giving me this time. I know the time is running out, and so I'll be extremely brief. This was a very rich session with so many, angles and stories being shared. And I would particularly like to emphasize upon the difference between consular protection and consular practices. The consular practices is a larger canvas in terms of, like the point that Paddy, you yourself mentioned, in terms of looking after one's own citizens and looking after the entire world. I think the consulates do have that purpose also, to look at the relations across the world. That's where I think what Mervat shared with us, the stories in terms of the negative stories of the consulates not behaving in a way of extending help, but rather being indifferent, and this happens mostly as a tit for tat when two consulates are involved. They don't, and the migrant or the worker or the beneficiary is caught between two stools. That happens, and that is not written anywhere. It is not part of the policy, but it takes place as a matter of practice. And I have ample number of examples to share, but I think there is no time enough. But one can actually debate on this, deliberate on this when Mervat writes back to us. And what Ambassador Noel said in his reflection in terms of the downside. The downsides are extremely important to be talked about. The upside we all expect and we celebrate them, but the downside nobody talks about. They're afraid to flag the downsides. And it is the responsibility of Ambassador Noel himself, or those who would like to stick their neck out, to say that, well, this is something which is not acceptable. Thank you.
Professor Binod, thank you for that. And now I'll call upon one of the vice presidents from Jrfdt, Dr. Raj, to share with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Paddy, for asking me to say a couple of words. Since we are running out of time, I'll be very brief. But first, let me thank all the panelists and a very warm welcome to Ambassador Lynch for now bringing in the Caribbean region to our session. So we are very, very grateful to you and your insights in this session. A couple of things I want to say. A lot has been covered. I see challenges for consular offices when the nature of migration changes. In other words, when you have regularly people coming regularly, they have a job, they settle down, they become diaspora. I think apart from paying social visits and so on, that's not a problem area. The problem area is when you have irregular, when you have temporary. And considering that now in light of the fact that the future migration is not likely to be permanent migration, because countries are preparing themselves to see how and when we can bring in people when we need them, and then we say goodbye and you go back. Now, this is where the issues will, and this is where I think the consular offices have to be prepared for. They will need more resources, because in the case of the Asian countries, you've got more migrants than you have very few consulates or the consular services. So there is that mismatch. But once you have this issue now, more temporary people are coming in. Even in the Caribbean, we have the farm workers program. I'm not too sure about Barbados. There is also the domestic service, if it's not a program, but people coming in for a short period of time. So what happens in between when the contract runs out or when their rights are violated, and that's when the work adds up. So what I'm saying is that while GCM objective 14, and in fact, this consular thing runs through many objectives. I think it's 8, I forget the number, I have written it down. So that means there's a lot of emphasis on that, protection of migrants as their human rights, as well as, of course, migrants as workers. So there's a lot of emphasis on that, but not much is expected in terms of the resource capacity of the consulars and how they can then mobilize other partners. For example, the diaspora, in the case of Barbados, is working very well, largely because it's easy to reach, they're organized, they're well established, and they have a data system, and they have regular contact with these. But not all the missions and consulates are that well organized. So you have a lot of challenges ahead. And the question I have is, how then the consular offices, how are the embassies being empowered, and what is their thinking to the country, back home, to say, okay, now these are some of the expectations from us, and we need to be resources well prepared, not only resources financial and technical, but need to be well supported to see when there is an issue, we have to deal with that issue, and we can't just leave them languishing in prisons for 2 years before their case can be heard. So I think there are a lot of challenges and need to prepare, and perhaps, other consulates coming together and strategizing. At least in the case of the Caribbean, there are few countries. I'm not too sure about the CARICOM strategy in this case, but they can, and I'm sure they meet and they say, okay, well, what are the issues? How can we handle these? This national is from my island, but that one is from another, but that is not the issue. The issue is then how can we put our heads together and address a human rights issue? But thank you very much indeed to all the panelists and to the participants. And thank you, Paddy, for moderating this so brilliantly. Thank you.
Dr. Raj, thank you very much for those reflections. And I think it's it's a timely point to bring our webinar to an end. First of all, to extend a sincere thanks for staying also this long, but also for starting off very early on your day-to-day, Honorable Ambassador Noel, for joining us all the way from the United States. Thank you very much. Namrata, for staying on. We know that it's late on your side there in India. Thank you for being here with us. And Ashu had to leave as well, and she's based in Malaysia, and it's super late for her, but grateful that she could be with us. And also to Mervat for being here and sharing really from a very authentic space. Among all these distinguished guests, we thank you for being a member of this panel and for sharing with us some very interesting insights. I think it's not my role to close without having to say that there's a lot of work I think that we have already unpacked in terms of what needs to be done. We have an opportunity, I think, as a global community from the different local spaces that we sit in the various capacities in terms of what we want to see the Global Compact for Migration spell out. We have this opportunity coming up through the International Migration Review Forum upcoming in May, where we foresee some kind of a change. And I think it's up to us to think about what kind of changes do we want to see, particularly when we talk about consular protection and assistance for migrants throughout that journey. And I think there's a lot that the panelists have unpacked for us, a lot that students can take on for your own thinking in your local spaces in terms of understanding, for instance, on downsides. You know, let's not be afraid to pick the downsides issues. I think that's one of the things we picked up. And how do we run along with those challenges until we meet the opportunities? And even though those opportunities are talking about opening, you know, new spaces, we've heard about how the Caribbean, for instance, is going to extend presence in Africa. I'm sure a huge budgetary effort, a huge effort in terms of opening these spaces, but also how about that collective action in the Middle East that we want to see, or the collective action in Europe or in other spaces in the Americas where we see human rights violations for migrants. And leading us is governments with the consular flying their flags high enough and being confident enough to negotiate, but also to engage with partners in Global South as well. You know, in these collective efforts. I think we've also seen what the interlinkages look like for our students who've been following the GCM webinar series. We cannot look at the objectives in silo. We can see the interconnections. You are very welcome to look back into the series that we have followed, but also to join us. For instance, this Thursday, we're going to be looking at Global Compact for Migration, already 15. So in the next coming weeks, we'll be doing 2 GCM objectives at a time because we're running at a race. And here we'll be touching on basic needs. Then at some point, we'll move to diaspora. At some point, we'll move to remittances. And we'll also touch on social protection. But all these issues that we have already been somehow been able to touch on. So as always, a delight to have a very engaging student joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Basil. We see you. We were wondering where you were, but it's good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. And again, to just say many thanks to all our panelists. Join us on Thursday for the next webinar on basic needs. And then again, next Tuesday and next Thursday, we continue on the conversations until we are done with the task we have in front of us. Thank you so much. Take care and stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.
Philippines. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bidon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paddy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Paddy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Grace. Thank you.